The sun hung low over Buckingham Palace, bathing its grand facade in golden light, a beacon of history and tradition. Tourists bustled along the wrought iron gates, their murmurs a dull hum against the rhythmic stomp of the Royal Guards in their immaculate red tunics and bearskin hats. Among them stood Private Reginald Reggie Harroway, a man of quiet discipline, a soldier who had sworn to uphold the dignity of his post. His posture was unyielding, his gaze fixed forward, unshaken by the constant barrage of camera flashes and awestruck whispers. And then, she arrived. Karen Whitmore did not blend into the crowd. She cut through it like a blade through silk, her expensive heels clicking against the pavement with an air of self-importance. The space around her seemed to warp, people unconsciously shifting aside, sensing the invisible force of entitlement that radiated from her very presence. Dressed in designer attire, adorned with jewelry that caught the light like 1,000 tiny suns, she moved not with the curiosity of a tourist, but with the expectation of a queen. Except she was no queen. She was something far different. Her eyes swept over the scene with thinly veiled disdain, at the crowds, at the commoners, at the Royal Guards who stood motionless in their disciplined stillness. A sneer tugged at the corner of her lips. How ridiculous, she thought. These men just stand here all day? What a joke, ***. Karen was not one to be ignored, and yet here was a man who dared to do so. She strode forward, her expensive perfume leaving an intrusive trail in the air, and positioned herself directly in front of Private Harroway. He did not move, did not flinch. The guard's training was absolute, to remain resolute, to not break, to uphold the silent honor of his post, And Karen hated that. With a dramatic sigh, she waved her manicured hand in front of his face. No reaction. The crowd watched, murmurs of curiosity rippling through them. Some chuckled, thinking it was all in good fun. Others frowned, sensing something darker beneath the surface. Karen's face twisted in frustration. "Oi," she snapped, tilting her head, eyes narrowing. "Do you not know who I am?" Silence. Her lips curled into something sinister. A glimmer of challenge flickered in her gaze. She would break him. She would make him acknowledge her, because in her mind, the world revolved around Karen Whitmore. A single step forward, too close. A violation of sacred space. Still, Reggie did not react. The air grew thick with tension, the energy shifting, like a storm brewing, just beyond the horizon. People began pulling out their phones. And then, it happened, A sharp, ringing slap cracked through the air, louder than the crowd's collective gasp. The impact of Karen's open palm against Reggie's unflinching cheek was jarring, a collision of arrogance against discipline. The force snapped his head slightly to the side, but his composure did not break. The world froze. For a moment, silence was absolute. The crowd stood in stunned disbelief. Even the birds above Buckingham Palace seemed to halt their flight. And then came the outrage. A woman gasped. A man cursed under his breath. Someone shouted, did she just hit him? The murmurs turned to a roar of indignation. The cameras kept rolling, capturing every second of Karen Whitmore's moment of entitlement turned infamy. Yet she did not falter. Instead, she smirked. It was the smirk that set the crowd ablaze, that self-satisfied, dismissive, unapologetic expression that seemed to mock everything the uniform stood for. And Reggie, still standing firm, his posture unbroken, felt the weight of history on his shoulders. He had been trained for war. He had endured the fiercest of drills. He had served in places most people never dared to think about. And yet in this moment he was powerless, not because he lacked strength, but because the rules that governed his station demanded restraint, And Karen knew it. She laughed. "Oh, come on. Are you lot really so dramatic?" Her voice dripped with venomous amusement. "It's not like I hurt him. He's a soldier, isn't he? Surely he can take a little slap." The crowd wasn't having it. Phone screens glowed as recordings uploaded in real time. Tweets were typed. Outrage spread like wildfire. This wasn't just a slap anymore. It was a symbol of unchecked privilege, of arrogance against honor, of cruelty against discipline. Karen, oblivious to the storm brewing around her, flipped her hair and turned her back on Reggie. And in that moment, she sealed her fate. Because what she didn't realize, what her arrogance blinded her from seeing, was that justice had already begun moving against her. The internet had seen, and the internet never forgets. What happened next was beyond anything she could have ever imagined. The internet does not forgive, It does not forget. It does not rest. By the time the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the London skyline in streaks of burnt orange and deep indigo, the wheels of unrelenting digital justice had already begun turning. The video, that slap that moment of arrogance and unchecked entitlement, had escaped the confines of Buckingham Palace and was now tearing through the internet at an unstoppable pace. It started with a single upload, a shaky phone recording, capturing everything. Karen Whitmore's sneering face, the sharp crack of her palm against Private Reginald Haraway's disciplined stillness, and the crowd's stunned, breathless outrage. And then came the comments. At first, it was just a few voices, outraged witnesses, indignant strangers. But outrage breeds momentum. Momentum becomes wildfire, and in a matter of minutes, the video was being retweeted, re-uploaded, shared across Facebook groups, forwarded through WhatsApp, dissected in Reddit threads. It reached America within the hour, Australia by dawn. By midday, it had spread across continents, sinking its claws into news cycles, celebrity talk shows, radio segments, political debates. And Karen Whitmore had no idea. Not yet. She was too busy celebrating herself. That same evening, she sat in the private lounge of an elite hotel in Mayfair, sipping on an overpriced cocktail, basking in the dim glow of crystal chandeliers and exclusivity. The room was filled with London's elite, men in tailored suits, women in designer gowns, voices hushed with the kind of self-importance that only comes from believing the world belongs to you. And in Karen's mind, it did. The slap had been nothing to her. Just another moment, another assertion of dominance over a world that always bent to her will. It hadn't mattered that people in the crowd had gasped. It hadn't mattered that some had scowled in disgust. Because at the end of the day, she was untouchable. She laughed, an indulgent, amused chuckle, as she recounted the scene to her equally detached companions. Oh, you should have seen his face. Like some pathetic statue, pretending I wasn't standing right there. I mean, honestly, what's the point of them? They just stand there, stupid hats, stupid rules, so I thought I'd, test if he was actually real. A round of hollow laughter followed. They weren't laughing because they thought she was funny. They were laughing because they were like her. Detached, entitled, unshaken by consequence. Karen took another sip of her cocktail, completely oblivious that at that very moment, her name was erupting across the internet like a storm. That her face was being smeared across news headlines. That people who had never heard of her before were suddenly united in their absolute loathing of her. It wasn't just anger, it was rage. Because this wasn't just about a slap anymore. It was about what the slap represented. For years, the world had watched people like Karen rise without merit, move without consequence, trample over the rest of society without a single ounce of remorse. And now, finally, they had proof, It wasn't an anonymous injustice this time. It wasn't a whisper of corruption that would be buried under wealth and influence. It was tangible, it was recorded, it was irrefutable. And they were going to make sure she faced justice. By the time Karen stumbled out of a lounge at midnight, cheeks flushed from one too many drinks, the first realization of consequence struck her like a freight train. Her phone, usually a beacon of social validation, was glowing with missed calls, messages, notifications flooding in at an alarming rate. Something was wrong. Her fingers swiped across the screen. And then, she saw it, The video. Everywhere. Hundreds of thousands of views. Millions. Growing by the second. Her name, trending, Her face, splattered across headlines, Her voice, replayed, dissected, ridiculed, condemned, And then the comments. Disgusting. How dare she? This is why privilege needs to be checked. She should be arrested. The buzzing, suffocating horror of realization constricted her breath. Karen staggered, clutching the phone as if holding it tighter would somehow stop the world from turning against her. But it was too late. It had already begun. She turned, eyes wide with panic, looking for some kind of refuge, someone to tell her this was all just a misunderstanding, a joke taken too far. But even in the dim glow of Mayfair's luxury, she saw it. The change. The way people in the lounge were suddenly glancing at their own phones, then looking at her. Some with smirks of amusement. Some with smirks of disgust. The realization hit her like a wrecking ball. For the first time in her privileged, cushioned existence, Karen was not the predator. She was the prey. And the hunt was only just beginning. The world around Private Reginald Harroway remained unchanged. The crisp London air still carried the scent of rain from the evening before. The Union Jack above Buckingham Palace still fluttered in the wind, a silent witness to the day's events. The rhythmic stomp of boots, the synchronized movements of the guards, the disciplined silence, it was all as it had always been. But something was different. He could feel it. He had been trained for stillness, for restraint, for discipline beyond human instinct. He had endured brutal winters in unrelenting fields, spent nights without sleep in grueling drills, pushed past exhaustion and hunger to become unbreakable. And yet the slap, that singular moment of humiliation, had left something behind. Not pain. No, pain was transient. It was the silence after the slap that lingered. The weight of injustice pressing against his chest with every breath. She had struck him, not because she had the right, not because he had provoked it, but because she could. Because the world had taught her that power was something that existed without consequence for people like her. And he had been powerless, The uproar from the crowd, the gasps, the outrage, it had all blurred into background noise against the deafening thunder of his own thoughts. He had done nothing, as he had been trained to do. And yet, for the first time in his service, it did not feel like honor. Now, standing in the barracks, away from the watchful eyes of the public, he finally exhaled. A long, measured breath, controlled, calculated. The fluorescent light overhead buzzed softly, a mundane sound in stark contrast to the storm raging outside these walls. He didn't need to check his phone to know. The world had seen. Somewhere behind those thick brick walls beyond the palace gates, his name was already spreading like wildfire. He was no longer just a soldier. He was a symbol, a victim of unchecked arrogance, a man who had been struck, but not broken. There was a shift in the air as a door creaked open behind him. Footsteps. Firm, deliberate. A presence he recognized before turning his head. Sergeant William Alden, a man who had seen wars, who carried the weight of service in the creases of his face, who had trained generations of men to stand exactly as Reggie had stood that day, entered the room. His expression was unreadable, his gaze sharp. For a moment, neither man spoke. Then the sergeant let out a slow, weary sigh. It's everywhere. The words hung in the air. Heavy. Final. Reggie nodded, his jaw tightening. He had known, of course, but hearing it spoken aloud made it real. The higher-ups are discussing it, Alden continued, rubbing a hand over his face. They want you to remain silent. Of course they did. Reggie swallowed the bitter taste of unspoken truth. It was always the same, wasn't it? Dignity over disruption. Silence over spectacle. Discipline over justice, But the world outside these walls, it was not silent. They were screaming for justice. Alden exhaled again, stepping closer. His voice lowered, steady. This isn't the first time something like this has happened, Harroway. A pause. But it's the first time the world cares. Reggie's eyes flickered to the older man. There, beneath the layers of duty and restraint, something unspoken passed between them. A shared understanding. The public was watching. And Karen Whitmore, she was waking up to a nightmare she never saw coming. Reggie hadn't moved a muscle when she struck him. But now, the world was moving for him. The night was thick with the weight of a world that would not forget. The digital storm had grown into something more, a reckoning, a force unstoppable, uncontainable, moving through every corner of the internet like a wildfire consuming dry brush. And at the center of it all, Karen Whitmore was beginning to suffocate. She had spent the last 36 hours watching as the life she had built, one of privilege, power, and unshaken certainty, began to crumble beneath her feet. It had started as an inconvenience. When she first saw the video trending, she scoffed. People were so dramatic. A slap? That was what had everyone up in arms. It would pass, just as all things did. A scandal today was forgotten by tomorrow. She had weathered worse, so she thought. But this was different. This was not a whisper of gossip among socialites. This was the world turning against her. Her inbox was flooded, not with the usual sycophantic admiration, but with pure, unfiltered rage. People she had never met, people from cities she had never stepped foot in, people whose lives she would never cross, and yet they all knew her name, And they hated her. They called her a coward, a disgrace, an example of everything wrong with the world. The comments were relentless, each one a hammer blow to the very foundation of her existence. Entitled which, "How does it feel to be universally despised?" Apologize? Too late. We want you ruined. She tried to ignore it, tried to believe it would blow over. But then came the calls. First, it was her business partners, cold voices, stripped of the warmth they once held. They used words like reputation risk, like damage control, like indefinite distancing. Then it was her so-called friends, messages of silence, avoidance, the careful disappearance of people who had once clung to her every word. And then, the final betrayal, her father, a titan of industry, a man whose name alone could open doors, could silence critics, could wipe away mistakes with the stroke of a check. She called him in panic, expecting reassurance, expecting him to fix it. Instead, she was met with a voice as cold as steel. "You've embarrassed the family." The words pierced through her. "Fix this. Quickly." And then the line went dead. Karen felt something she had never truly felt before. Not frustration, not irritation, but fear. For the first time in her privileged, untouchable life, she felt the weight of consequence pressing down on her chest. She turned off her phone, pushed it away like it was a snake coiled and waiting to strike. Her breaths were shallow, her vision blurred. This wasn't supposed to happen. She was Karen Whitmore. She was powerful, untouchable, and yet the world had decided otherwise. She was falling, and there was no one left to catch her. Somewhere beyond the four walls of her luxury apartment, beyond the trembling glass of her overpriced windows, London carried on. And at Buckingham Palace, standing firm beneath the weight of history, a soldier did not move. He did not check his phone. He did not see her panic. He did not need to, because the world was already moving for him. The walls were closing in. Karen Whitmore sat in the dim glow of her lavish penthouse, surrounded by the ruins of a life she no longer controlled. The city below pulsed with its usual energy. London never stopped, never paused, never cared for the individual struggles of its inhabitants. But for the first time, Karen felt truly isolated. Her world, once meticulously curated, had turned against her. The polished marble floors, the handcrafted Italian furniture, the silk curtains that once made her feel untouchable, they all now felt like prison bars. Her own wealth mocked her. None of it mattered. Not when her name was being dragged through the mud of public disgrace. She had spent hours, endless hours, watching as the internet devoured her reputation whole. Article after article. Karen Whitmore, the woman who slapped a soldier. Privilege exposed, the slap that shook Britain. A lesson in karma, when power meets its reckoning. And the comments, the comments, She had stopped reading them, but their echoes screamed in her mind. Good. She deserves this. This is what happens when you think you're above the rest of us. She thought she was invincible. Look at her now. Her hands trembled as she reached for the half-empty glass of wine on the coffee table. Her last comfort, but even the familiar warmth of alcohol did nothing to quiet the roaring storm inside her. She had tried, how she had tried, to control the narrative. Her PR team had gone into damage control, issuing vague statements about deep regret, and misunderstandings, They had tried to spin it, tried to paint her as a victim of an overreacting society, But the world wasn't listening. They had already decided. They had seen the smirk on her face, the utter lack of remorse, the callousness in her voice. The damage wasn't just done, it was etched into digital eternity. She pressed her fingers against her temples, trying to stop the headache that had taken residence there for the last 2 days. And then, the notification sound, She flinched. Dread curled in her stomach like a sickness. Her phone lay face down on the table, but she knew, it wasn't good. Nothing was ever good anymore. She hesitated, breathing deeply, before finally picking it up. A new headline. A new nightmare. Her blood ran cold as she read the words slowly, deliberately, as if by taking her time, she could change their meaning. Ex-royal staff speaks out. Karen Whitmore's pattern of abuse. A breath caught in her throat. The world had dug deeper. They had found more. She clicked on the article with fingers that were no longer steady. The text blurred before her eyes as she scanned it, heart pounding against her ribs. Eleanor Prescott, an ex-staff member of the royal household. A name Karen hadn't thought about in years. The woman had worked as an assistant at a palace event over a decade ago, an event where Karen had been an honored guest. And apparently, the past had not been forgotten. The article detailed an incident Karen barely even remembered. A verbal attack, a humiliation, an abuse of power that had left Eleanor in tears. The words in the article stung, not because they weren't true, but because they were being seen. Karen could already imagine the headlines multiplying. This wasn't just about the slap anymore. This was about who she was, who she had always been. The mask had cracked, and now, piece by piece, it was falling away completely. Her breath came fast and shallow. The glass in her hand slipped, shattered against the marble floor. Her hands were shaking. For the first time in her entire life, Karen Whitmore felt powerless. The world had turned its back on her, and it wasn't finished yet. The night air was thick with the kind of silence that only came before a storm. Reggie Haraway sat alone in the barracks, staring at the dim glow of his phone screen, his reflection barely visible in the black mirror of its surface. Unread messages, missed calls, asterisk asterisk his name, his face, plastered across news articles, social media feeds, endless comment sections filled with fury, admiration, and something far more dangerous, curiosity. He had done nothing. That was the part that gnawed at him. He had simply stood there, endured, upheld his duty, as he had been trained to do. And yet now the world was treating him as if he had become something else entirely, a symbol, a talking point, a pawn in a much bigger game. The video had not just sparked outrage against Karen Whitmore. It had, without his permission, placed him at the center of a battle he had never asked to fight. And now the questions had begun. Who was he? What kind of man was Private Reginald Haraway? What darkness could they dig up from his past? Reggie had spent years building a life of discipline, honor, and quiet resilience, but the internet had a hunger for blood, and it would not be satisfied with just Karen's downfall. It wanted more. It wanted balance, asterisk asterisk, and balance meant finding a flaw in him. He clenched his jaw, his grip tightening around the phone. The headlines were already shifting. The soldier behind the slap. What do we really know about Reginald Haraway? Is he the hero the internet thinks he is? And then, asterisk asterisk, the whispers of a past he thought he had buried, asterisk asterisk. A scuffle in his youth. A mistake, one he had paid for, one he had left behind when he joined the military. But that didn't matter. Not to the people who were now looking for anything they could use to rewrite the narrative. His stomach tightened as he scrolled further, the cold light of the screen illuminating his hardened face. He barely blinked as he read. Asterisk asterisk accusation. Speculations, asterisk asterisk, a faceless journalist questioning whether the man in uniform deserved to be the face of justice. They weren't just attacking Karen anymore. They were coming for him. A slow exhale left his lips, his breath steady despite the storm gathering around him. Because Reggie had learned long ago, life was never truly about justice. It was about who could withstand the fire the longest. And whether he liked it or not, the fire had come for him. The courtroom was thick with tension, the kind that seemed to settle in the air like a storm cloud, heavy and inescapable. The oak benches, polished to a gleam, were filled with journalists, onlookers, and silent spectators, some driven by curiosity, others by an almost palpable hunger for justice. At the center of it all, Karen Whitmore sat motionless, her manicured fingers clasped together in her lap, as if she could hold herself together through sheer force of will. But beneath the carefully applied foundation and the expensive silk of her tailored suit, her pulse betrayed her. It thudded erratically, each beat a reminder that the world no longer belonged to her. She had walked into this courtroom with the confidence of someone who still believed in the power of money, of connections, of influence. But now, as the proceedings unfolded, as evidence was presented, as the murmurs around her grew darker, she could feel control slipping through her fingers like grains of sand. The prosecution had been relentless. Every detail of that fateful slap had been dissected under the cold, unflinching scrutiny of the law. The footage, played in agonizing slow motion, had captured more than just a moment. It had exposed the entitlement, the sneer, the sheer audacity of it all. The prosecutor's voice was measured, but there was an undercurrent of steel beneath it. This was not an accident. This was not a lapse in judgment. This was a calculated act of arrogance. An act that, in her mind, held no consequences because until now, she has never had to face them. Karen's jaw clenched. She could feel the weight of eyes on her, dissecting, judging, condemning. Her lawyers had fought back, of course. They had tried to spin the story, tried to paint her as a woman caught in a moment of frustration, blown out of proportion by the unforgiving lens of social media. But it wasn't working, because the world had already seen her for what she was. The final blow came when Eleanor Prescott, the former royal staff member, took the stand. Karen had almost forgotten about her. A ghost from the past, a name that had meant nothing to her at the time. But as Eleanor spoke, as she recounted her own experience with Karen years ago, in another moment where she had thought herself untouchable, Karen felt something she had never truly felt before. Dread. The words cut through the courtroom like a blade. She humiliated me. She laughed at my distress. She acted as if my pain was an inconvenience to her. Karen's breath came shallow, uneven. She wanted to scream that it wasn't fair, that the past had no right to crawl out of its grave and drag her down with it. But justice had been waiting, and it had finally caught up to her. The judge's voice rang out, echoing through the silent chamber. And in that moment, Karen Whitmore understood what it meant to be powerless. The courtroom was silent, but not the kind of silence that brought peace. It was the kind that thickened the air, making every breath heavy, charged with something unseen yet undeniable, the kind of silence that meant something had shifted. Karen Whitmore sat motionless, her spine rigid, her hands clasped so tightly in her lap that her knuckles had turned white. But wasn't composure, it was containment. Control. A desperate attempt to keep herself from splintering under the crushing weight of exposure. And then came the sound. A chair scraped against the polished wooden floor, slow and deliberate. The witness had risen. Eleanor Prescott, a woman Karen hadn't thought of in over a decade. A woman she barely remembered, because why would she? She had been nothing more than an assistant, an invisible cog in the grand machine of privilege. But now, Eleanor was anything but invisible. She stepped forward with a kind of quiet strength that Karen did not recognize. Her presence was not loud, but it was undeniable, like a storm rolling in over calm waters. Karen wanted to look away, but she couldn't. She couldn't because she knew. She knew that Eleanor was the moment everything would unravel completely. The woman took her place at the stand, adjusting the microphone slightly. The courtroom remained still, waiting, as if the very walls could sense that something was about to be unearthed. Then Eleanor's voice, steady, unshaken, and far too clear for Karen's liking, I remember the day vividly. A breath caught in Karen's throat. The past was waking up. Eleanor continued, her words deliberate, measured. She did not embellish. She did not need to. I was 25, working at an event in the royal household. A gala, filled with important people, the kind who never look you in the eye when they speak to you. I was young, eager, foolishly hopeful that if I worked hard enough, I would be respected. Karen's pulse pounded in her ears. And then it came. She humiliated me. Eleanor turned, for the first time, to look directly at her. Karen felt it, a sharp, invisible blade slicing through the facade she had spent years perfecting. She made a game of me, Eleanor continued. Mocked my uniform, called me the help, as if I were some kind of amusement, something beneath her. And when I spilled a single drop of wine, one drop, on a tablecloth, she ensured I was removed from the event entirely. The room felt smaller. The weight of every gaze pressed against Karen's skin, suffocating, searing. She made sure I was fired that night, Eleanor added, voice unwavering. Not because of the spill, but because I was in her way. Karen's throat was dry, tight, strangled by a truth she had spent a lifetime ignoring. This wasn't just about a slap anymore. It was about a pattern, a lifetime of entitlement, cruelty, unchecked power. The court had been waiting for something like this. A confirmation, a thread that pulled back the curtain to reveal that the slap at Buckingham Palace had not been an isolated incident, but rather a manifestation of something deeply ingrained in her character. Karen knew what was coming next. She had known at the moment Eleanor had walked through those doors. Judgment. And this time, there would be no escaping it, The courtroom had changed. It was no longer just a room of law and order, no longer simply a place where evidence was presented and decisions were made. It had become something else, something far greater than the sum of its walls and wooden benches. It had become a reckoning, and Karen Whitmore was drowning in it. She had come here today believing, hoping that she still had a foothold, that her legal team would smooth over the chaos and shift the narrative back into her control. But she had been wrong. She knew it from the moment Eleanor Prescott took the stand. She knew it from the moment the whispers turned into quiet nods, the shaking of heads, the shared glances of people seeing something they all understood. Because this wasn't just about her anymore. This was about all the Eleanor Prescotts of the world. The ones whose voices had been dismissed, whose lives had been brushed aside by the weight of privilege, the ones who had been told their experiences didn't matter because the world belonged to people like Karen Whitmore. And now, now the world was watching, Karen sat stiffly in her chair, her body still, her fingers clenched in her lap, her nails digging into the skin of her palm as if she could anchor herself to something, anything, before it all collapsed. The judge's voice rang out, sharp, controlled, a contrast to the chaos that was unfolding outside these doors. She had seen the cameras when she arrived this morning. The sea of people, the picket signs, the reporters shoving microphones forward, desperate for a single word from her, a single glance, a single moment of weakness. She had refused to look at them. She had marched forward, head held high, pretending that she was still in control. But now, she felt it, the walls closing in, her own breath turning shallow. She could hear her lawyer speaking, but the words were muffled, distant, as if they were coming from behind a thick pane of glass. Because it didn't matter anymore. She could see it in the jury's expressions, in their eyes. They had already decided, and she knew what was coming next. She had spent a lifetime believing she could shape the world to her liking, that she could bend it around her like an accessory, something she could wear when it suited her and discard when it did not. But today, the world had decided that it would not bend for her, It would break her instead. The moment the judge's gavel struck the wood, the sound reverberated through the courtroom like a thunderclap. Final. Absolute. Karen Whitmore's breath caught in her throat, but she refused to let herself react. Not yet. Not here. Not in front of them. But it was over. The verdict had been read. Guilty. The word echoed in her mind, colliding violently against every belief she had held about the world and her place in it. She had walked through life untouchable, above consequence, wrapped in the security of wealth, power, and carefully curated influence. But today, none of it had mattered. She sat frozen, her spine rigid, her pulse hammering in her throat. She could feel the weight of every pair of eyes on her, the collective judgment of a society that had, at long last, turned against her. Somewhere to her left, she heard a quiet murmur, a sound of approval, a ripple of quiet satisfaction that came not from cruelty, but from something deeper. Justice. Karen clenched her jaw. Justice. The very thought of it sent a slow, cold rage curling around her ribs. Justice was a game for those who could afford to lose. And she had never planned to lose. Her lawyer leaned in, whispering something in a hushed, urgent tone, but she didn't hear him. Her ears were ringing. Outside the courthouse, she knew a crowd was waiting. She had seen them through the tinted windows of the car that had brought her here, rows of people with cameras, signs, voices sharpened into weapons, And soon, she would have to walk through them. A slow, creeping dread settled into her bones. She had spent years walking through the world like it belonged to her, expecting admiration, deference, respect. But now, she would walk through those doors and see only disdain staring back at her. The realization was suffocating. For the first time, Karen Whitmore felt truly small. And there was nothing she could do to stop what came next. The doors swung open, and the noise hit like a tidal wave. A wall of sound, a cacophony of voices, flashing cameras, and the relentless, unyielding force of public reckoning. Private Reginald Harroway stood at the threshold, his body still as stone, trained for discipline, for endurance, for the kind of restraint that most men would crumble under. But even he wasn't prepared for this. The world had turned him into something larger than life. A symbol, a story, a pawn in a battle he never asked to fight. His name had been spoken on news channels across the world, his face plastered onto headlines, debated, dissected. The internet had painted him as the stoic, unwavering soldier, the embodiment of quiet dignity in the face of arrogance. But the truth was simpler. He was just a man. And now he had become something more. He stepped forward, and the press surged like hungry wolves. Questions were hurled at him from every direction. Reggie, how do you feel now that justice has been served? Do you forgive her? What message do you have for those who see you as a hero? The word stuck in his throat. Hero. He had been trained to act, to serve, to protect. But what had he done? He had simply stood there. He hadn't fought, hadn't spoken. He had taken the slap, endured the humiliation, and let the world decide the meaning for him. And now they wanted more. A reaction, a speech, a moment, but he gave them nothing. His silence, the very thing that had fueled this wildfire, remained unbroken. His gaze lifted for a fraction of a second, just enough to scan the crowd. Among the blur of cameras and microphones, he saw them, asterisk people who had never met him, never known him, but had claimed his story as their own, asterisk. Some called for justice, others for vengeance. And then there were the ones who just wanted a piece of him, for profit, for attention, for the next viral moment. He exhaled slowly. He had never belonged to this world of headlines and scandals. He belonged to his duty, to his uniform, to the men who stood beside him in quiet loyalty, away from the public spectacle. And so, without a word, he walked past them, leaving the cameras, the noise, the story, because his story was never theirs to own. The first thing Karen Whitmore noticed was the cold. Not just the physical bite of the early morning wind cutting through the thin fabric of her standard-issue uniform, but a deeper, more consuming cold, one that settled inside her, taking root in the hollow space where her certainty once lived. She had woken up in a different world. Gone were the satin sheets, the Egyptian cotton, the soft glow of a city skyline twinkling beyond floor-to-ceiling windows. Gone was the comfort of privilege, the invisible safety net she had always assumed would catch her. The walls around her were small, unremarkable, sterile. The bed, asterisk, a stiff cot that creaked beneath the weight of her new reality, asterisk, was nothing like the indulgent softness she had once taken for granted. And the uniform? It was rough, unfamiliar, scratchy against her skin, as if designed to remind her of exactly where she was. Her fingers curled into fists at her sides, nails pressing into her palms. She would not break. Not yet. The air was thick with the murmur of others, asterisk, other people, other voices, other lives that had in one way or another landed in the same place she had asterisk. She could hear the shuffle of feet, the clinking of trays, the low hum of a world that did not revolve around her. For the first time, Karen was not the center of anything. She forced herself to stand. She would walk with purpose. She would not let them see her falter. But then came the whispers. She had known, of course, that people would recognize her. The courtroom had been public. The trial had been watched by millions. And now, she was no longer Karen Whitmore, the socialite, the woman who had once commanded rooms with a glance. Now, she was Karen Whitmore, the disgrace. A name spoken in hushed tones. A lesson in karma. A warning. She kept her chin lifted, her expression carefully blank, but she felt it. The weight of every stare. Every smirk. Every lingering glance that held a satisfaction she had once thought reserved only for people like her. The power dynamic had shifted, and she was standing on the wrong side of it. A part of her wanted to scream, to tell them they were wrong, that they didn't know her, not really. But she knew better. She knew that it didn't matter anymore, because in this world, she was just another name on a list. And that was a punishment no court could have handed down. The room was dimly lit, a single flickering bulb casting elongated shadows against the damp, peeling walls. The air was thick with the stench of sweat, desperation, and something else, something Karen Whitmore had never encountered before. True fear. Not the kind of fear that came from a possibility of bad press, from the whispers of gossip columns or the threat of social exile. This was something different, something raw, something primal. This was the fear of irrelevance. Karen sat alone at the edge of a metal cot, the thin mattress barely enough to cushion the ache in her spine. Her hands, once accustomed to clutching crystal glasses and silk handbags, now trembled against her lap, the cold of the room seeping into her very bones. She had always imagined that the worst thing in life was to lose wealth, to lose status, asterisk. But she had been wrong. The worst thing was to be forgotten. Outside, the world moved on. The headlines that had once been consumed with her name, with her scandal, her downfall, her reckoning, they were growing fainter by the day. The same public that had once demanded her destruction, her punishment, her suffering, was now bored. She had given them everything. A villain, a downfall, a lesson in karma. And now, she was nothing to them, asterisk. Karen clenched her jaw. her breath coming in shallow, uneven bursts. It wasn't supposed to end like this. She had always believed that, no matter what, she would find a way back, that she would rise again. That people like her, people with power, influence, control, always found a way to reclaim their throne. But now, sitting in this cell-like room, stripped of her identity, stripped of the armor that had once shielded her from the world, she realized a truth more terrifying than any court ruling. No one was waiting for her to return. She had been replaced, forgotten, discarded like an outdated headline, a scandal that had served its purpose and was now nothing more than yesterday's entertainment. Her fingers curled into fists, nails biting into her palms, but there was no anger left to sustain her. Only silence, only the crushing weight of consequence. And for the first time in her life, Karen Whitmore understood what it truly meant to be powerless. The world outside had changed. The streets bustled with life, people moving with purpose, their conversations a blur of overlapping voices. The traffic hummed steadily, taxis darting between red double-decker buses, the scent of roasted chestnuts from a street vendor curling into the crisp London air. The city was as indifferent as ever, unshaken by the personal tragedies of any single individual. But for Karen Whitmore, the world was unrecognizable. She stood at the edge of a pavement, the weight of reality pressing down on her like an iron yoke. The cold wind cut through her thin, ill-fitting coat, one she would have once scoffed at, dismissed as something unworthy of her touch. Now it was all she had. She glanced around, but no one looked at her. None the way they used to. Once, eyes followed her wherever she went. People whispered her name with admiration, some with envy. The air shifted when she entered a room, the atmosphere bending to accommodate her presence. But now, she was just another face in the crowd. She tried to lift her chin, to carry herself with the same effortless confidence she once had. But it was a hollow imitation. She could feel the tremor in her fingers, the ache in her jaw from holding back the emotions threatening to swallow her whole. Then she saw it, her own reflection, staring back at her from a shop window. The sight was jarring. The woman who stood there was a ghost of Karen Whitmore, a woman she barely recognized. The sharp, poised elegance had faded, replaced by something raw, something fragile. The expensive hair treatments that once left her locks sleek and polished were long gone, her once pristine complexion no longer protected by the finest skincare money could buy. For the first time, she looked ordinary. She swallowed against the lump in her throat. Was this what obscurity felt like? The street carried on around her, people brushing past without a second glance. No cameras, no reporters, no whispered conversations anticipating her downfall. They had moved on. She had given them a spectacle, a public fall from grace so perfectly executed that it had entertained the world, and now the show was over. She turned away from the window, forcing her feet forward. The movement felt unnatural, like walking through a world she no longer belonged to. The emptiness stretched before her, vast and consuming. For the first time in her life, Karen Whitmore had nowhere to go. The sky was heavy with gray, an endless stretch of muted clouds pressing down upon the city like a weight too great to bear. The streets, slick with the remnants of a passing rain, gleamed under the dim afternoon light. The world moved as it always had, indifferent to the lives that unraveled within it. Karen Whitmore walked without purpose, her steps slow, dragging, as though the earth itself resisted her movement. There was a time when she had walked these same streets with an air of untouchable confidence, the world bending around her, shaping itself to accommodate her presence. That time had long passed. Now, she was just another figure in the crowd, unnoticed, unimportant, forgotten. The realization cut deeper than she had expected. She had lost everything, asterisk, the wealth, the status, the carefully curated identity that had once shielded her from the harshness of reality, asterisk. And reality was cruel. No more whispered admiration from envious socialites. No more calls from prestigious brands eager to attach their name to hers. No more invitations to events where she could sit upon her throne of illusion, looking down upon the world with detached amusement. Instead, there was only this dull, suffocating existence in a world that no longer cared whether she rose or fell. She passed a cafe she used to frequent, a place where her name alone had once ensured the best table, the finest service. Now, she was met with indifference, the faces inside lost in their own lives, their own stories. She had ceased to be relevant. Her fingers curled into fists, nails digging into her palms. Had it really all come to this? A year ago, she had been the center of it all, the power, the prestige, the influence. And then, with one act, the world had turned on her, torn her apart, piece by piece, until there was nothing left. She had thought she could withstand it. She had been wrong. A newspaper stand caught her eye, the bold black letters of the headline glaring at her from behind a layer of plastic. A new scandal takes center stage. Karen stared at it, her breath catching in her throat. Not her name, not her face. Someone else. The world had moved on. They had replaced her. She had once been the story, the obsession, the headline, the downfall that everyone wanted to witness. But scandals were a currency, and once spent, they were discarded. She was yesterday's entertainment. Her lips parted, but there was no sound. Just the sharp sting of realization settling deep within her chest. This was worse than the public outrage. Worse than the trial. Worse than the humiliation. She no longer mattered, and no one was waiting for her to return. A gust of wind rattled the papers in the stand, flipping pages, whispering secrets of a world she no longer belonged to. Karen Whitmore pulled her coat tighter around herself and walked on, swallowed by the city, by the indifference, by the silence.